New York, USA. Friday, March 22nd, 2025, 1:35 p.m. Imagine a courtroom filled with people buzzing with tension. In the center of it all is a young boy, Jamal Thomas, alone, vulnerable. His eyes wide with uncertainty, yet his heart beats with the unshakable truth that he has done nothing wrong. He is homeless, but his mind is sharp. He is black, but that should not matter in a place that prides itself on justice. Yet today, it does. Today, it is the very thing that will make his fight harder. Jamal was just 14 when the system turned its back on him. Living in the streets of Chicago, struggling to survive, he was falsely accused of stealing a woman's purse. No one believed him. Not the store owner, not the police officers, certainly not the judge who presided over his case. This story is about more than just one boy. It's about the dark side of justice, where the scales are not always balanced, and the people we trust to uphold the law sometimes forget their duty. This is a story of racism, abuse of power, and the crushing weight of the system on a child who had no one to stand beside him. Today, we're going to witness a shocking moment. A moment when the judge, in the very place meant to protect and serve, crosses a line. A moment when a child already carrying the burdens of life is belittled in front of everyone. A moment that will forever change the lives of those involved. But this story does not end in defeat. Jamal's courage in that courtroom, despite being pushed to the edge, will set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Why does this matter? Because it shows us that justice is not always served in the places we expect. It shows us that power can corrupt, and that even a child can stand against it. This is not just Jamal's fight. It's a fight for everyone who has been judged before they had the chance to speak. This is the story of a boy who, against all odds, found his voice. This is the story of change, of redemption, of truth. So stay with me for the next 25 minutes. You'll witness how an underdog can flip the script, and how karma will eventually catch up to those who misuse their power. Comment: racism must end if you're ready to see truth served in the most unexpected way. Because this moment will prove that no matter how dark the system may seem, the light of truth will always shine through. Jamal Thomas, at just 13 years old, found himself living on the streets of New York City after his family fell into a downward spiral of hardship. His mother, once a hard-working single parent, lost her job at a local diner. His father, struggling with addiction, became less and less present in his life. With nowhere to go, they sought shelter in a rundown homeless facility, barely able to make ends meet. Jamal quickly learned that survival was a daily battle. Though Jamal's life was difficult, he was no stranger to resilience. He attended a public school in the area where the buildings were worn and the resources limited. Despite being homeless, Jamal was an intelligent and caring young boy. He helped his peers with their studies and often acted as a voice of reason among the chaos of his circumstances. His smile, though rare, had the power to brighten even the darkest of days. But every day was a challenge. His life was a mix of survival and hope, finding solace in his education while enduring the harsh realities of life outside the classroom. One day, while Jamal was at a protest rally, everything changed. The rally was filled with passionate voices, protesting for change. But when things turned chaotic, Jamal was caught in the middle. He was walking past a wealthy businessman when the man's briefcase was snatched. Jamal, who had been trying to help a woman who had fallen, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But his fate had already been sealed. He was picked up by the police, who assumed he was the thief. "I didn't steal that briefcase. I was just trying to help someone," Jamal pleaded, his voice trembling. The police officer, indifferent to his pleas, dismissed him. "Tell it to the judge, kid." Without a lawyer, without family to stand by him, Jamal was thrown into the legal system, alone, abandoned by those who should have protected him. He stood in that courtroom, a young boy in a world that had forgotten him. The accusations against him were baseless, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that Jamal had no resources to fight back. He had no one. This story is not just about one boy, but about a system that failed him from the start. It's about a child, vulnerable and alone, left to face the cruelty of a world that judges him based on his appearance and his circumstances. It's about a young life reduced to a statistic, not because of his actions, but because of his background. Jamal's struggle is one many children face, abandoned by their families, ignored by society, and criminalized for the circumstances they are born into. This is not just his fight. It is a fight for every child who has ever felt abandoned, unseen, or judged for things beyond their control. If you've ever felt abandoned or judged, drop a heartbreak in the comments below. You're not alone. The courtroom was filled with tension as Jamal Thomas stood before Judge Rebecca Warner, the man presiding over his case. The air was thick with anticipation, and the eyes of the spectators were locked on him. Jamal, wearing a worn-out hoodie and jeans, felt the weight of the room pressing against him. Alone, abandoned, and nervous, he stood before a judge who seemed determined to break him. "Name." Judge Warner's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Jamal Thomas, sir," Jamal replied, his voice small and unsure. Judge Warner looked down at him with disdain. "Speak louder, boy. The courtroom's not a playground." Jamal swallowed hard, his throat dry. He was scared. Scared of the judge, scared of the courtroom, and most of all, scared of the world that seemed to have turned its back on him. "I didn't steal anything, sir." "I swear," Jamal pleaded, his voice shaking. Judge Warner's gavel slammed onto the desk with force. "Don't utter another word, or else I will contemptuously throw you out." His voice rose in fury. The words hung in the air like poison. Jamal froze. His heart raced. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The words of the judge reverberated through his chest. What had he done wrong? He wasn't the thief. He didn't belong here. But in the eyes of the system, he was already guilty. Judge Warner's tone turned venomous. "I bet you're a good-for-nothing, stealing piece of trash. What's your excuse? You think you can play the system?" Jamal's face flushed red with shame, his eyes stinging with tears he refused to shed. How could a judge treat him like this? He hadn't done anything wrong. All he had ever wanted was to survive. But here he was, being berated by someone who was supposed to uphold the law. The room felt suffocating. Jamal stood there, alone. The fear was palpable, and even the gallery of spectators exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one spoke out. No one intervened. But one person did see. A young attorney named Lisa, who had been attending the trial as part of her internship, was in the back of the room, recording the proceedings for an assignment. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The injustice was undeniable. Lisa whispered to herself, she really just said that. On camera. No way. The scene would soon become a viral moment. But at that moment, Jamal was trapped in the courtroom, facing a system that refused to see him for who he really was, a scared child just trying to survive. Comment. Enough is enough. if you're tired of seeing this kind of injustice unfold. Because this story is not just Jamal's. It's a story of all of us. A story of a system that has failed too many children like him. Lisa, shaken and disgusted by what she had just witnessed, quickly took out her phone. She uploaded the video to her social media account with a single powerful hashtag, #Justice for Jamal. She couldn't stay silent. No one could. The world, Jamal's story had gone from being a tragedy to becoming a rallying cry for justice. People who had never met him were now standing up for him. His voice, though quiet in that courtroom, had now become the voice of a movement. Comment, enough is enough if you're tired of seeing this kind of injustice unfold. Because this is more than Jamal's fight. It's a fight for everyone who has ever been ignored, judged, or mistreated by the very systems that are supposed to protect us. In the wake of Jamal Thomas's public humiliation, the walls of justice that had once shielded Judge Warner began to crumble. The media, now armed with Lisa's damning footage, dug deeper into the judge's past. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the legal community. Judge Warner wasn't just guilty of one outburst of abuse. She had a long history of racial discrimination and misconduct in the courtroom. Reports surfaced of multiple instances where black defendants were treated harshly by Warner. Her rulings were questioned, but the system had protected her until now. But this time, the public was not going to let it slide. At the tribunal hearing, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The room was filled with reporters, spectators, and legal professionals, all there to witness what would happen when the system turned on one of its own. The chair of the tribunal, a stern-faced man with decades of legal experience, addressed Judge Warner with unwavering authority. Judge Warner, do you deny the allegations that you verbally abused Jamal Thomas, a 13-year-old homeless child, in open court? The tribunal chair asked, his voice steady but piercing. Judge Warner, already on edge, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face was flushed with anger, but he tried to maintain composure. I was just doing my job, he stammered, attempting to justify his actions. He was being disrespectful. Lisa, the young attorney who had filmed the incident, stood up as a witness. She wasn't afraid to speak the truth. With every eye on her, she made her statement, her voice clear and unwavering. What I saw wasn't justice. It was cruelty. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not a child. He was a child. I've never seen anything like it in my life. The room fell into stunned silence. Jamal's humiliation, captured on camera, was now an undeniable truth in front of a tribunal that could no longer ignore it. Judge Warner's actions, once swept under the rug, were now on display for all to see. The severity of his words, the hate in his voice, was impossible to deny. Then came the moment that changed everything. The tribunal chair's voice cut through the silence. Based on the evidence presented, this tribunal is suspending Judge Warner from his position immediately and launching a full investigation into his conduct and history of racial bias. Boom! The sound of the gavel hitting the table reverberated through the room. The audience erupted in applause. Justice was being served, finally. For Jamal, for Lisa, for everyone who had ever been ignored, judged, or mistreated, this was a victory. But it wasn't just about one man. It was about the system and the power of truth to expose the darkness that hides behind it. The investigation would continue, but for the first time, there was hope that the system could change. Jamal's case, though painful, had brought that change closer to reality. Comment: Racism has no place in court, to show your support for Jamal and those who fight back against injustice, because this fight isn't over. It's only just begun. After the tribunal's ruling, Jamal Thomas's case was officially dropped. The humiliation he had faced in that courtroom was now recognized as a grave injustice. The new presiding judge, in an unexpected act of accountability, issued a formal apology to Jamal. He expressed deep regret over the way the system had failed him and how one man's actions had affected a child's life so profoundly. The apology was not just for Jamal. It was for every child who had been unjustly treated by the legal system. But Jamal's victory didn't stop there. His resilience had sparked a movement. The New York Homeless Youth Program, recognizing his potential, awarded him a scholarship to attend a private school. It was a chance Jamal had never thought possible. From the streets to a classroom that valued him, he now had an opportunity to rewrite his future. His new school environment, though a far cry from the shelter he once called home, would provide him with the tools to succeed. He no longer had to worry about where he would sleep at night. Jamal's mother, Tina, also found new purpose in the aftermath. She had long struggled with the system, trying to make ends meet while raising Jamal. Now, she worked with activists to help other homeless families navigate the legal system. She provided support, guidance, and legal assistance to families who had nowhere else to turn. Tina became an advocate for the voiceless, just as Jamal had been in that courtroom. At a local rally to raise awareness for homeless children, Jamal took the stage. The crowd had gathered to hear from the boy whose story had captured national attention. "I may not have a home, but I have a voice. And that's more powerful than anything," Jamal said, his voice strong and sure. His words resonated with the crowd, a testament to his strength and the power of speaking out against injustice. From that moment on, Jamal wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was a symbol of change. Jamal's story sparked a nationwide conversation about the treatment of homeless black children in the system. From lawmakers to everyday citizens, people began to question how the legal system treated the most vulnerable members of society. Jamal's courage had ignited a fire for justice. Now, as Jamal walked the halls of his new school, he carried with him not just the weight of his past, but the hope of a future where he could make a difference. Comment: flexed biceps, if you believe Jamal's story should be shared far and wide. His victory isn't just his own. It belongs to every child who has ever been overlooked or unjustly treated. Jamal's story reminds us that change is possible when we find the courage to speak out. At a community rally, Jamal Thomas stood on stage, his voice echoing through the crowd of hundreds. He had come a long way from the boy who once stood terrified in front of Judge Warner. Now, he was a symbol of resilience, a voice for those who had been silenced by the system. Jamal stood tall, a beacon of strength despite the battles he had faced. His words, spoken with conviction, reached deep into the hearts of those who had gathered to hear him. "You can call me whatever you want," Jamal said, his voice unwavering, "but you can't take my dignity. And that's something money can't buy." The crowd erupted in applause. The sound was deafening, and Jamal's heart swelled with pride. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for every child who had been treated unjustly, for every person whose dignity had been stripped away. And they were all standing with him. A woman in the crowd shouted, her voice full of admiration, "You're an inspiration, Jamal." Jamal smiled, his eyes shining with the strength he had found through the pain. "We're all in this together," he responded, his words a testament to the unity that had been forged in the fire of injustice. His message wasn't just for the people in front of him. It was for anyone who had ever felt powerless, anyone who had ever been judged before they had the chance to speak. Jamal's pain had become his power. He had turned the scars of his past into a force for change. His story didn't stop at the courtroom. It didn't stop at the moment when the judge had been held accountable. It had grown into a movement, a spark that had ignited a nationwide conversation about justice, race, and the treatment of homeless black children in the system. Jamal's victory wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a victory for everyone who had been overlooked, everyone who had been mistreated. And as he spoke to the crowd, it was clear that his journey had only just begun. The power of his voice, once silenced by fear, was now unstoppable. His story would inspire generations to come, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage can rise and change is possible. Comment Justice for All. To stand with Jamal and every child who deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. Jamal's story is proof that when we come together, we can break the cycle of injustice, and we can create a world where every voice is heard. Judge Warner's career came to a crashing halt. The tribunal's decision to suspend him, coupled with the public outcry, marked the end of his judicial path. The very system that had once protected him had now turned on him, and he was no longer in a position to harm the lives of others with his prejudices. But while Warner's downfall was significant, Jamal Thomas's journey was only beginning. Jamal's case had made waves. His story had sparked a national conversation about the treatment of homeless black children in the system, and the inherent biases within that system. But Jamal wasn't just a figurehead for a cause. He was an active participant in that change. He became a youth advocate, dedicating his life to speaking out for those who had no voice, those who were trapped in circumstances like his own. Jamal's work didn't stop at rallies or speaking engagements. He sought out ways to mentor young people who, like him, felt forgotten by the world. He started working with organizations that provided legal assistance to homeless youth, ensuring that no child would ever face the kind of injustice he had. His resilience had become a beacon of hope for countless others. Jamal's efforts to bring attention to the racial bias in courtrooms didn't fade after his victory. They gained momentum. Advocates, legal professionals, and activists across the country took up his cause, using his story as a rallying cry for reform. The battle against systemic racism in the legal system had only just begun, and Jamal's voice was now part of that fight. His experience in that courtroom had shown the world how deeply embedded the issues of race and class were in the legal system. What happened to Jamal was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a larger problem that had existed for far too long. But the public pressure, the movement sparked by Jamal's courage, was beginning to force change. Schools, communities, and legislators were all starting to confront these issues, and they were starting with Jamal's story. But Jamal wasn't finished. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he was determined to continue advocating for those who had been silenced, for those who had been judged before they even had a chance to speak. As his voice grew louder, so did the conversation about how we treat those who are most vulnerable. The legal system, once a place of justice, was now being held accountable for its actions, and Jamal had helped lead the charge. The fight was far from over. It was just beginning, and Jamal was ready to lead the charge. Want more stories of underdogs rising? Watch our next video. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on that bell for more powerful stories that you cannot afford to miss. The world needs to hear these stories, and we need to keep spreading the truth. Join the conversation. Let's keep fighting for change.